Francis Ngannou won one of the biggest MMA fights in his life last night, and PFL had their biggest night in company history. But was it enough for them to gain any ground or pull any fans away from the UFC? So today we're going to talk about that. This is going to be a PFL Super Fights Battle of the Giants Brace for Impact. Fuck, that's a long name. We're going to do a card reaction. We're going to talk about PFL as a product, all right? So stick around to hear my thoughts. I'm Wyatt. This is Fight Society. Francis Ngannou had one of the biggest wins of his MMA career last night, where he defeated Renan Ferreira via first round TKO. Now, I'm going to make a separate video that talks about specifically that fight, but in this video, we're going to talk about this card and we're going to talk about PFL as a product, because this was their biggest and best card in company history. We're going to talk about the quality of the card itself, such as the matchmaking and otherwise. We're also going to be talking about the production itself, because I have been very critical of PFL production, and we're going to get into that as well. So we're going to be talking about PFL as a product, because they're trying to compete with the UFC, but they're not a proven product. The UFC is a proven product, and that's why they can get away with subpar cards. PFL's got to go hard. So let's talk about this card. So we have the early card, and that's their prelims. They're just trying to brand it differently than the UFC. We have local fight, as Ariel Helwani put it, local fight, because you have these Muslim world, Middle Eastern fighters, North Africa, Middle Eastern fighters. First fight of the night, Tariq Ismail versus Taha Ben Daoud. Very low level name notoriety for the fight. Same thing goes for the next fight and the fight after that. But when you get into the very last fight of the night, Raufeon Stots beat Marcos Breno. This was a good fight. Raufeon Stots was a Bellator world champion. He lost the belt to Patchy Mix. He might have been the interim, I can't remember, but he was a world champion with Bellator. And he was on the prelims, which makes the prelims look a lot better than they really are, because the first three fights before that are pretty abysmal. Nobody cares about them. And this is supposed to be, I guess you could say, like PFL trying to put on their International Fight Week or the UFC 300 style event for them, because obviously they're not as big as the UFC or their company. They're putting on the biggest possible card. So the early card, also basically their prelims, was pretty mid. Nothing to really tune in for. I didn't even stream these fights. I did a fight companion for just the main card. Now let's actually get into the main card. So to start off the main card, we had two former featherweights, AJ McKee and Paul Hughes. AJ McKee was a Bellator featherweight champion. He lost the belt and then moved up to 155. He's been with Bellator since the beginning of his amateur career, actually. He's Antonio McKee's kid, and he's gotten some preferential treatment, but he is a nasty, nasty fighter, slick ground game, and fights hard, even though he got beat up by Paul Hughes, and he stuck in there. Paul Hughes, many people are saying he's the biggest Irish prospect in MMA since Conor McGregor. He came from Cage Warriors. He was a featherweight as well. I guess he's going to be a lightweight going forward. This was a fantastic fight. I thought Paul Hughes won decisively. It was competitive in moments, but Paul Hughes was landing the bigger shots. He dropped AJ McKee at the end of the second round. He ended up getting a split decision win, which I thought was favorable towards McKee. I thought it should have been a unanimous for Paul Hughes. 29-28, maybe 30-27, but 29-28 for sure. He dominated the fight. And if you don't say he dominated, you can at least agree that he very decisively won a competitive fight. Which might not be a domination, but it was clear cut who the better fighter was. And then up the card from there, we had, as Helwani referred to them, local fights. We had another no-name fight. You had Zafar Mohsen against Hussein Kadamagamayev. And Kadamagamayev was like a minus 2,500 favorite, and Mohsen was a plus 1,200 underdog going into this fight. Despite being such a huge underdog, Mohsen actually dominated the fight, and the live odds was something that was really interesting to see throughout the fight, because it started at like minus 2,500 for Kadamagamayev, and by the end of the fight, it had been a complete reversal, and Mohsen was like a minus 1,200 by the end of the fight on the live odds. He absolutely dominated. He's obviously juiced to the gills. These PFL guys are going to be juiced to the gills, especially when they're fighting in the Middle East, where they're not going to send people out there for drug testing. I'm just going to be honest. I don't think the PFL is working that into their budget. Too much of it went to Francis and promotion, and I don't know what else. I don't know where their money goes, but I'll get to that in a minute. Moving on from there, we had the Bellator world title fight at middleweight. Johnny Eblen versus Fabian Edwards, who is the brother of former welterweight champion in the UFC, Leon Edwards. In their first fight, which was about a year ago, Fabian Edwards cut Johnny Eblen badly, and Johnny Eblen showed incredible heart and also sense of urgency to go and get a finish on Fabian Edwards after being badly cut, because the cut was so bad he could have gotten stopped. Now, in this fight, Fabian Edwards, until the last round, basically didn't show up. Johnny Eblen has a relatively boring style. Conor McGregor was making fun of this style on Twitter, talking about why BKFC is where it's at, and that not UFC, but that MMA is better than what it's become because you have too many people trying to stall positions to win points, to win decisions by points. And in this fight, Johnny Eblen had very dominant control grappling, while Fabian Edwards was in a defensive position for most of the fight, really struggling to get back up. He gassed very early, and then he turned it up a little bit towards the end of the fourth, and then for the fifth round, he really started to cook. I thought if he would have put on that pressure maybe 2 minutes earlier, like early fourth round instead of end of fourth round, he could have built some momentum and gotten a finish, because he had Johnny Eblen hurt on multiple occasions, especially with those front kicks and knees to the body. It was just too late for him to mount any sort of real momentum that would change the outcome of the fight. He was just too exhausted from the defensive grappling against Johnny Eblen. Now, moving on from there, so Johnny Eblen gets the decision win, 49-46, clear cut on all three cards. Really good fight. It wasn't as boring as Conor McGregor might have cut it out to be on his Twitter. It was a really good fight, but there was a lot of stalling positions from Eblen. But he's an undefeated. I mean, I think he's probably a top 5 guy in the UFC. And I think Edwards is a top 10 guy in the UFC. So hopefully we can see some of these fights actually happen in the future. It's fun to see co-promotion and things like that, because Ryzen used to do it with Bellator. PFL has technically done it with Bellator. I guess technically it's not a co-promote because it's the same company or same umbrella, but different brands. We move on from there. Cyborg versus Larissa Pacheco. This is, as I mentioned earlier last week, this was essentially like the leftover fight because Kayla Harrison left, because Larissa Pacheco wanted a trilogy with Kayla Harrison. Cyborg wanted a fight with Kayla Harrison. She left for the UFC. And now just the two people that didn't get the Kayla Harrison fight ended up sticking around, and they fought each other. Chris Cyborg won by decision, mostly getting takedowns with top control. Larissa Pacheco did land some really big shots. She had Chris Cyborg cut badly around her eyes, but it wasn't anything to necessarily affect the outcome of the fight. It was very clear cut for Cyborg. Not the most entertaining fight, but fun-ish. We move on from there to the main event, Francis Ngannou versus Renan Ferreira. I'm going to make a separate video about this fight. It'll drop later on tonight, so come back around for that. But Francis Ngannou beat the odds, uphill battle, many doubters, as I predicted, early knockout. TKO technically, but he did go out cold, so Ferreira did go out cold, so I guess technically a knockout. But as I predicted, there was every reason for me to pick Ferreira, and I went with a gut feeling, a hunch that Francis was going to get it done, and he did. So as far as the card goes, that was the card. I'll make a separate video that'll drop tonight about Francis and Ferreira's fight. I think that there's enough around that fight that it deserves its own video. Now, talking about the card quality compared to the UFC, the top 3 fights, same thing I said last week. The top 3 fights are UFC pay-per-view level fights. The rest of the card, except actually McKee and Paul Hughes as well. That's a very high-level fight. High-level fight in a B-level promotion. Glad to see it. But the rest of the card, dog shit. The rest of the card, you can't build a promotion off of this type of card. You have to have more depth. That's what they have to do. PFL has to get more depth on their roster. And if they aren't going to do that, they need to find a way promotion-wise to get us to care about these fighters. Because if they're going to throw, this is their biggest card ever, and you're doing Hussein Kadamagamayev against Zafar Mohsen on the main card of a pay-per-view above Paul Hughes and AJ McKee. It's almost like where the UFC tries to sneak in that one women's MMA fight that doesn't make sense on that second slot on that second main card slot after a fire main card opener. That's what PFL does with the Saudi or like the Muslim local fights, essentially, which I don't like at all. They have a lot of money coming in from that area, that region, but they still have to treat it like they're building a fight promotion. They can't treat it like the Saudis treat fight promotion with boxing and PFL and UFC cards, where they just throw whatever amount of money at these fights to make them happen. PFL is actually trying to build a business, and so they need to approach things differently. They need to find a way to promote. They're fumbling their promotion badly. You have to get us to realize or see or understand that these prelim fighters are somebody we should care about in the first place, or you have to get more depth on the roster. Top of the card, fantastic. Extremely top-heavy card. Prelims, terrible. Halfie and Stotts is the exception. He's actually nasty. And then this main card fight, you should have just switched. You should have put Halfie and Stotts on the main card. Halfie and Stotts versus Marcus Brino as the main card opener, and then Kata Magamayev and Mawson go on the prelims. That's how they should have done it, but whatever. They have investors that they have to suck up to. I get it. That's the talent side of the product. Now, the other side of the product is the production, and that's what I'll get to. The production for PFL is subpar. Now, I'm going to be honest. They did improve with this card, but there were still some glaring mistakes to be talked about. First off, we had no dead air, which they tend to have, which I noticed this entire regular season that they had. They had so much dead air. They would show a fight, they would quickly break it down, and then they would cut to a wide shot of the half-empty arena with no promos, no breakdown, no desk analysis, anything. It would just sit there while the in-house DJ was playing music for minutes, like 6, 7, 8 minutes. And that just slowed, that brings the card to a screeching halt. Now, I have to give them credit. They did fix that. The pacing of this card was really good. They went fight after fight after fight after fight. I think I streamed the entire main card in, let me see. I streamed the entire main card, and I also hopped on early and stayed on after. I streamed the entire main card in 3 hours and 1 minute was my fight companion yesterday. So they actually did fix something to do with the pacing, which was big. But the product, from a production standpoint, still needs work. They did have multiple times where they cut to the crowd and they just show a bunch of empty seats, which is just a huge L on your pay-per-view card that you're trying to get people to pay money for. And you're showing empty seats. Like, how am I expected to pay $50 for a pay-per-view when you can't even get people, you can't even sell out an arena in one of the richest countries in the world, like from, you know, concentrated wealth, whatever, that doesn't matter. But there's a lot of rich people in Saudi Arabia, and you have Francis Ngannou, who came off of 2 huge boxing fights. 2 huge boxing fights that were packed with thousands, like tens of thousands of people in these arenas that they built in Saudi Arabia. The Tyson Fury fight and the Joshua fight had so many people there. But Francis fights for PFL and they fumble it. You have a smaller arena that doesn't get sold out. That was rough. And they showed it. They showed it on the broadcast. A couple other notes. The lighting is almost too bright. It looks like you're watching like a high school wrestling match at times. I think that they need to take the lights off of the crowd like the UFC does. I know they don't want to copy the UFC's product or production, and Don Davis has bragged about the fact that they have more brighter production. They have more analytics, like they have more things showing up on the screen. They have more stats. They have the live odds. They have more technology because of the referee glasses that have cameras on them. They still don't actually convey combat sports in a proper way. It's better than boxing. I'll give them that much. It is better than boxing. I hate the boxing intros and we got to do national anthems for every single country. They did a flag ceremony at the beginning of this card and the pacing was nice, but the only thing they need to improve is the commentary is not good. Actually, the Helwani vision that they did, the Ariel Helwani vision, where they had Jake Paul and Tim Welch and Gronk and all those people calling in, that was better than the actual commentary itself. I watched both of them, and I gotta be honest, Ariel and all of those just random stars and combat sports people and Chael and all that was way better than Randy Couture and Dan Hardy there's just no passion. Like, Dan Hardy is too stoic. Randy Couture is too old school. I know they're big names. Overall, I wish that the PFL felt honestly looser. It just, everything feels so tight about the PFL. Like, that's kind of what we like about the UFC, is that at times, a lot of the time, the UFC feels like the Wild West. You got crazy shit going on with Conor and these guys, and guys that get in trouble outside of the actual octagon. And you have, you know, random stuff like number 8 Khalil Roundtree gets a title shot and actually gives Ferreira his toughest fight at light heavyweight. PFL just feels so tight. Like, it's too corporate, tight sports. It's too much like the corporate sports of NFL, NBA, all that stuff. And those sports have started to loosen up as well. They allow more flair and personality. PFL, it's got bright commentary, or it's got bright production. It could make it a little more dramatic, in my opinion. The commentary's dry. I preferred the Helwani vision that they did. The uniforms are terrible. They need to do something different. The uniforms are awful. I like takedown. I train in takedown gear. I like takedowns gear, but the PFL's uniforms suck. They look cheap. They look like you went to like a local print shop and had them print like team uniforms for you. They're terrible. The pacing did improve, and then aside from that, it just needs to be more fun. Everything's so tight. And then you take into account but they have the tournament format. And that tournament format kind of gridlocks things where you can't have the biggest matchups take place if somebody's competing in a tournament. At some point, they're going to have to abandon this tournament model, this regular season model, and they're going to have to turn towards a matchmaking model, I guess, with investors, and for the sake of trying to say we have something new, because investors are going to be like, what's different from the UFC? And you say, oh, well, we actually do the best versus the best. We have this season format that makes everything fair. I understand that people that are trying to invest money that may have experience in mainstream sports that have regular season and playoffs, such as baseball, basketball, football, hockey, blah, 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 blah. Those people may relate to the regular season and tournament format that PFL puts forward, but fighting's just different than those sports, and you can't treat it like those sports. And that's why I think the PFL is going to stay stale until they just say, fuck it. We got all this investment. Let's sign some big names. Let's do super fight matchmaker formula, and let's do some big cards. Let's start running events that people want to watch, okay? Because I'm tired of seeing PFL regular season on a Friday night, and it's 10 fights where you have 4 of them are WMMA flyweight fights with people we've never heard of that have 5-5 records, 4-3 records. The rest of the fights are like Dagestani or European guys with EV or OEV at the end of the name, and they just go back and forth and have grappling exchanges for a decision. Like, you got to do better. Like, you have to switch to this format on a consistent basis. You could have done 3 matchmaker type cards in the future, and you can put Francis as the main event of one of them, Eblin as the main event of another, and Chris Cyborg as the main event of a third one. There you go. Start making those type of pay-per-views, but don't make them pay-per-views because you're not big enough yet. I don't care how much money you're spending on the company. You're not big enough yet. And put on big cards because you're still in an investment period. You're not making money yet, I don't think. So just go as big as you can and keep it affordable to view. You're not big enough for pay-per-views yet. There's what I think about PFL. The cards need to get better. The promotion needs to get better. The product needs to get better. And they need to abandon the tournament and regular season format. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you very much. Hey guys, thank you for watching this video. Make sure to like, subscribe, all that YouTube stuff. It really helps me out a lot. If you're interested in supporting the channel further, then become a channel member today for access to members only live streams, vlogs, and some other members perks. So click the link in the description down below or the join button on our channel homepage to become a member today. If you're interested in some non-MMA content from me, go check out my personal channel, Wyatt's World, and go check out my weekly comedy podcast, What's Up Bro, with Wyatt and Bo. Both of those are linked in the description down below. Go watch this suggested video, and we'll see you next time.